Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 62nd episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all. We are enjoying early spring, and Jared's book is approaching. It approaches. There's more things happening.
3 months. It's coming.
Yes, 3 months.
It lumbers.
It looms. And you know, what? Now that we've got those two big, pop star albums out of the way that people were waiting on, now we can get down to the real news here. You know, Beyonce, Taylor, whatever. The real stuff, the more important stuff. Let's see. So, Jared, I understand there may be an event or two coming up in the near future. Yes? No?
Yes. My dance card is still getting filled out, but right now, the big one that's coming up is in September. I will be at Rose City Comic Con in Portland as a featured guest. I'm not letting it affect me anyway. I'm still going to be friends with everybody I was friends with before.
If you listeners could see Jared preening right now, my God.
It's really nice that we don't have to go through your layers of lawyers that will be coming in. And different PR people will be like, what?
We're part of the entourage, right?
Yeah. You're grandfathered in. Yeah. Cut this. I forgot to look up the dates.
Well, I can say what it is.
I mean, it is far in the future.
It is far, but I think it's helpful to.
We're here to help you, inform you.
Yeah, so I will be there. The con is September 6th through the 8th, and I will be doing signings and panels, and those aren't, we don't know what they are yet, but they will be happening, so if you are in Portland or feel like traveling to Portland, you can come see me.
Portland is a good spot for us, as anyone who attended our live recording there last year knows, so just, stuff happens there. It's good. Yeah. So I think I know a couple of people will be going there anyway, so it'll be one of those things to get to lean on and go go, 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 go.
Yeah, please don't let me sit in an empty signing for 90 minutes or whatever it'll be. Please come by.
We've seen, Oriana and I have seen some of the advance notes coming in on the book, and we know that there will be fans. We have a naive and simple faith, but one reinforced by truth.
Yeah.
So, it's absolutely
if I see anybody,
case.
I'm not saying anybody should do this, but if I see any cosplayers as characters from the book, I will cry. So,
what a wonderful moment that would be! Oh my gosh!
And remember, it's an illustrated book. You will have your models.
Yeah.
There's no excuse, cosplayers. You know what to do. Do something different. So let's see.
No excuse.
Exactly. Slightly more seriously. So keep that in mind. Mark your calendars, and of course, more on the West Passage as it comes nearer. Once again, pre-order link will happen in the show notes because you should have by now, and now you almost have no excuse anymore. Simple as that. However, there is other stuff to talk about. There is some actual interesting news this month. Again, wow, it's nice when it happens. So, Jared, please do take us away.
It's musical interpretation news month here on By-The-Bywater. So something really interesting to note that has been announced. The Lord of the Rings musical revival that happened last year in the UK is coming to the US. The Chicago Shakespeare Theatre on Navy Pier will be hosting a production from July 19th to September 1st. It's an open-air theater, a little different setting than the Watermill production last year, as well as a bigger stage overall, so we'll see what, if any, changes are done on that front. Tickets are now available for purchase, and we'll have some links in the show notes. And some other interesting news that surfaced. You might remember that a couple of years back we mentioned that Paul Corfield Godfrey, a British composer who for literal decades has been working on various operatic adaptations of Tolkien, had done some extensive work on a full version of the Silmarillion. Recent weeks have brought new news that the Tolkien estate has given express permission to Godfrey to directly use Tolkien's writing in a full interpretation of The Lord of the Rings, planned as a 15-hour work that could be performed over 6 evenings. That is longer than the Ring cycle, y'all. A formal demo version sung by performers from the Welsh National Opera, as was the Silmarillion recording, is planned on being due in 2025. This is the first time that the estate has directly allowed any composer or musician to quote from Tolkien's work. Not even the musical does that. So it's a notable step, and we'll see what results.
Yeah, it was really weird to learn that this was the first time that the estate has just gone ahead and signed off on everything. I mean, arguably there was the Donald Swan recordings done in the late 60s for that particular album, but Tolkien was still alive, so, he fully signed off and participated in that. He was very much on board. Maybe we'll talk about that one of these days. But yeah, ever since then, every last Tolkien tribute you ever heard, every last, bad power metal epic that rips off or borrows a title, or things like this. And as noted, the formal musical, which, had its own thing that was done strictly through the Solzance Middle-earth Enterprises and all that other stuff that happened in the past, and now is its own thing, doesn't directly quote from it either, given some of the up and down quality of some of the songs. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. So the fact that we have a full operatic version is interesting. So, Jared, I seem to remember you'd heard some of Godfrey's work before, like when the Silmarillion came out and looked into it, and of the three of us, you're probably the closest to an opera expert we have. But was there anything particular stood out for you about that, or do you know anything more about this or the samples here?
First of all, my toxic trait as an opera fan is that I don't like it when I can understand the words.
Fair. Okay.
Because it does feel a little ludicrous to me to hear people singing opera in English, and I know that is maybe just a me thing. So I had a hard time with it anyway, but I also felt like it wasn't particularly interesting. And I didn't listen to all of it. So maybe I gave up too soon, but I just was like, it's just kind of boring. It's not doing anything that's really, fun or cool. It's just kind of there. Yeah. But again, I didn't listen to all of it, and it's possible I listened to the two boring parts or something like that.
We'll find out. So yeah, no, we'll have a couple links up to some information on that, including some, I think, sample recordings of things that have already been done. So we will see where it comes from. And then the musical is coming to the U.S. at long last. This is notably the first time, again, to emphasize, the first time any form of the musical has actually been held in the United States. It did debut here in North America, but it debuted in Toronto, not in New York, and never actually was performed on or near Broadway. And so this is a classic sort of go straight to a regional theater, but a very well-known one. Chicago is an incredible theater town. Let's not get that wrong here at all. So this will be reasonably high profile and sounds pretty good for a summer thing, like last year was there too. I won't be able to make the time to go out there to do that, but I wouldn't blame anybody for wanting to go or take a weekend or something like that.
Oh, I am I have strong ties to Chicago, and actually 20 years ago this year I did a summer program at Northwestern. My birthday is also July 19th, and so
there you go.
maybe we can, I don't know. We'll see.
I do kind of want to go see it. I don't know if I will, but I kind of want to.
Especially since there's so much else to do. Summer in Chicago is so great. It's hot and humid, but that's everywhere now. I don't know.
We love that.
Yeah, but being set on something like Navy Pier, it's sort of you're out over the water, so it'd be a little bit better, maybe. So,
it's probably a little bit better. It does get slightly cooler down by the water, although ask anyone who's been to Lollapalooza how much cooler it actually is.
This is a good point. So I have been to Chicago, but it was not during the heat depths of summer, so I admit it was one of those things I probably snuck out on that one. So so who knows? If we give you a future on the scene report from there, we'll let you know. But in the meantime, now you know, and again, we'll have links and stuff like that so you can find out more. But with all that said, time to move on now to our episode discussion. The topic of choice is Oriana's, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the Rohirrim, which was kind of a general topic, because we're getting that animated movie, War of the Rohirrim, in December of this year, and I think we should dig into these guys, because I'm kind of wondering, are the men of Rohan the baddies? Not this all that. I feel like that makes more sense if you do it online and can put the gif of David
Mitchell.
Yes, thank you. In the Nazi costume. Obviously, they're not the baddies. Like, but do they kind of suck? Are they just Gondor's pet thugs? Which is like, this is such an annoying. This is such an annoying contrarian position to take, right? Like, it's so silly, but like, especially because like Éowyn is awesome and Théoden is very noble and Éomer is played by Carl Urban in the movies, and they love their horses like family and they're good to the hobbits. How could you not love them? But I kind of want our listeners to picture this. You're living out a nice little life on some fertile land. Maybe you farm, maybe you herd some livestock. I don't know. You speak your own language and you follow your own customs and you've got this little culture of your own. And all of a sudden, a bunch of big blonde people on horses come in and kill your friends and family and tell you this is their land now. That's what the Rohirrim do to like two different groups of people. So, like, the land that the Rohirrim live on has been inhabited by, like, a bunch of different people, including, like, people from Gondor, people from Numenor. Like, it's played host to a lot of different people over the, like, millennia. We're going to talk about, like, two of these people. The first are the Druidine, whom you might remember from our episode on Gonbury Gone, which I encourage. That was, like, a long time ago at this point.
That was a long time ago.
But I do encourage you guys to all listen to it because it's a great episode. But as just sort of a little refresher, they're men, but they're a little more like hobbits and dwarves. They're like a slightly different kind of man. And they lead a pretty tough life because since time immemorial, everyone has been trying to kill them all the time because they look kind of different. They're a little more Neanderthalish. They're sort of implied to be more quote-unquote primitive-ish. Again, I encourage you to go back to listen to that episode because we talk a lot about that. The second group of people are the Dunlendings, which are much more like regular men. They're descendants of one of the three original clans of men who migrated into the west of Middle-earth. So the Dunlendings are from the folk of Haleth, and so their language is like completely different from the other sort of families of men. They originally lived further west, but our good old friends, the Númenóreans, arrived and cut down all of the forests and totally devastated their land and essentially drove them out and were really awful to the Dunlendings, who we actually don't even know the Dunlendings' own name for themselves. The Dunlendings it's not their own name for them. So the Númenóreans persecuted them and were extremely hostile to them. And then in the third age, so that's in the second age. In the third age, there's a great plague that depopulated the countryside. Gondor is kind of in a state of collapse, and the people that originally were living in what is now Rohan had kind of just moved eastward, and it was empty. And so the Dunlendings were like, well, this is like a really nice place to live. Let's go live there. And then the steward of Gondor just like hands this beautiful, rich, fertile, rolling land to the Rohirrim in thanks for helping Gondor fend off a big attack of like orcs and Easterlings and Sutherlings too, I think. After years of living peacefully and arguably suffering from the same attack, the Dunlendings and the Druidine are essentially evicted from their land, and the Dunlendings are understandably not okay with this. They become bitter enemies of the Rohirrim. You know, on the one hand, like, human history is full of this kind of story, but there's a couple things within the text of The Lord of the Rings itself that feel like Tolkien is hinting at the Rohirrim kind of being a-holes. Apologies to our younger listeners, but like, it really is the best description for how they act sometimes. Our first clue is an exchange that we discussed at great length in the episode about Gonbury Gone, and it's one that feels ominous and revealing. Gonbury Gone is a chieftain of the Druidine, these sort of wildwood woses, and they are extremely good at tracking, scouting, moving stealthily through the woods, and they are going to lead the Rohirrim to the Pelennor fields by sort of back ways to avoid being confronted by large groups of orcs that are guarding the road. So the only thing that Gon wants in return for this pretty nice service that he's providing is for the Rohirrim to stop hunting his people for sport. And we don't really linger on it in the text because the story is not from the Druidine's perspective, but that really tells us kind of a lot. We will talk about Helm Hammerhand and the War of the Rohirrim in a minute, but first I want to check in with you guys. Am I just being a contrarian jerk? What are you guys thinking?
No. I think it's one of those things that, the more time goes on, the more it becomes sort of a, the more you think about this story. Because, initially, when I first read it back in 83, late 83, it's sort of like, oh, and these are the bad guys, and all that. So, and the Rohirrim are the good guys. And we're very much getting it from that perspective. And so you just sort of roll with it. It's sort of like these ominous notes are always there, and the sort of this idea that it's something else. But then it's sort of like what? I have to say, what's interesting, it's never occurred to me before. It should have done, but some of what you're describing right now in terms of and this could be incredibly intentional on Tolkien's part of describing the Dunlendings as sort of like first being buffeted around by an imperial power, and then they're sort of like, okay, they're in, and then all of a sudden this other group comes in. It's sort of like, this sounds like the history of the Welsh, to a large degree. And then it made me wonder, would Tolkien have written it this way, or would he have taken to an angle if he himself were Welsh, as opposed to somebody who had an evident interest and sympathy in it, as is well known. Sindarin is derived in many ways from Welsh, a language he knew well, so he could not have been blind to the larger history. And we've talked in episodes like on imperialism and other things about his interesting thoughts regarding, independence connections, this, who inhabits the British Isles, what and where. And, there's more I'm sure could be unpacked there, but without getting too lost in all that and keeping it back to the Rohirrim, it's notable, I think, that you've correctly, framed the story of the Rohirrim this way, because if you read Lord of the Rings for the first time, like, I did, and know nothing else, what you get is ultimately the Rohirrim story. First, we end up in Rohan, we learn about them. We initially hear about them as this, very proud people. We know that there was a thing about, did they want to give Gandalf a horse, and what did he pick, and so what's the deal is. And so in our first encounter with them is sort of like Éomer and sort of like, okay, in his band, we get a sense of, all right, how do they interact? What stance does Aragorn take in terms with them? How does he sort of like, break down the suspicion and where it leads from there? And there's much more to be said about that. But then if you get into the appendices, you learn a little more about how, for instance, they were ultimately the people who, have connections not merely back to, Eorl the Old, but where that people ended up from, back to the history of Rovanian, the whole kin strife, this whole idea that there's this aligned people who ended up in one spot or another and now are coming back, who have this connection with, the descendants of Numenor, essentially, this whole particular project. And I made a joke, but it's an important one, at the end of last episode saying, yes, the Anglo-Saxon Cossacks, which is a great line from Diana Wynne Jones that she put in her wonderfully hilarious guidebook, The Tough Guidebook to Fantasyland, if I remember right, is the title. Marvelous book. Which
I love that book.
It's a fantastic book. It is. I recommend it to any aspiring fantasy writer. Have that book with you, because it will frame all the cliches you should avoid. And she was very, very good about that. And she, of course, marvelous author. If you haven't read her, please do. If you've only seen Howl's Moving Castle 1, as is always the case with Miyazaki, different from the book 2, etc., blah, blah, blah. Setting all this aside, and Diana Forever, the whole idea is that this sort of wish fulfillment of Tolkien's, that they were Anglo-Saxon Cossacks, that if the Anglo-Saxons had all that other historical stuff, again, you see it from the point of view that this is very much a wish fulfillment thing on the part of Tolkien, saying, boy, what if, how so? The Anglo-Saxon names given, blah, blah, blah. Again, we could add it on. But again, the framing is essentially all, heroic or positive or from that angle or things like this. It's only when you stop and think about it, and arguably, maybe the older you get, and you're like, occupying powers, driving people out to fringes, weird resonances, especially right about now. It's something that, it really does make you wonder. And, as much as I'm looking forward to the movie for many reasons, at the same time, I'm like, ooh, I know we have more information on this story than most. And, it's a lot better in that regard than, I don't know, a certain TV series. But at the same time, it's sort of like, should we have gone here? Maybe there was something else that could have been done. I don't know. It's going to be hard, especially given some of the information that we know of from the story. How it digs in, and it complicates the story. I love the Rohirrim, and I deal with them as they are. The characters are great. It works in that regard. There's a lot of buried bones in this whole story in many different ways. So.
Yeah, cosign.
Thank you, Jared. There, we're done.
Episode over. Great talk, everybody. Yeah, no, I remember reading the book for the first time, and it's like, oh, Rohan, it's so great. Oh, wow. And then you hear about the Rohirrim going oh, yeah, those hill folk have allied with Saruman. This is their disparaging name for us and all of that. And they're I forget if it's in that conversation, maybe it's Éomer who's like, they hate us for having taken their lands long ago or something like that. And it's like, okay,
huh?
You gonna leave that one unexamined, bro? You're gonna... And he's not the most introspective guy in the story, so it kind of makes sense that he's like, whatever, these are ancient enemies.
Yeah,
but...
it was hundreds of years ago.
How could you still be mad about that? It is very uncomfortable. The resonances.
Yeah. I mean, I'll throw in, I think that, again, it's kind of an illustrative point. It's a story that isn't as well known because it's in the Unfinished Tales, but I think it's key reading for anyone interested in the Rohirrim. It's the bits we get, about how the Rohirrim ended up in what became Rohan in the first place. We get a little something about the backstory. We get a bit of the famous ride that they do to help in the battle. And then most of what we get is actually the combination of it's really some of Tolkien's best writing in terms of setting and mood. It's very evocative. This sense of going up to what turns out to be Elendil's tomb at this one location in what becomes Rohan, and there's Ted Naismith has a very lovely painting of it that just looks marvelous. Frankly, get a sense of this sort of ritualistic thing being given where Kirian, the steward, signs it over and things like that. And Arrow says accepts it and all. And what you have to think about is sort of like, isn't this right around where, not too far from where the Druidine are? Huh. Notice who's not invited. Notice who else isn't invited. No Dunlany. It's just these things. It's sort of like no other people. You don't get a sense of whoever was there. You get the sense of, there were some people, but there were few. And I'm like, did people want to move?
Right?
Did they express any interest?
Just because there weren't that many of them doesn't mean you can't just kick them out.
Right? And especially with the Druidine, given the history of the Druidine going... There were Druidine on the island of Numenor who left, presumably with elf friends. I'm guessing they didn't build their own boats that could cross the sea. I'm guessing they arrived with elf friends back to the shores of Middle Earth. And it's like, you guys were bros. Whoa, why not include them in this? Nope. None of that. It is interesting, Ned, talking about the movie. So that was the inspiration for this. People have seen it played at that one festival, and someone did a really nice breakdown on Reddit of all the reactions and all of the interviews. It was very helpful to have all of this information in one place. I should have saved it, but it does seem to follow the story in the appendices pretty faithfully, let's say, which is totally fine, especially because the portrait of the Rohirrim that we get, it's really important to keep in mind that it is probably from the perspective of Merry / at least some Aragorn in there. Literally, all of the retelling of those events comes from people who are really predisposed to the Rohirrim and think and really be cool with that and not ask too many questions. So, the movie The Roar of the Rohirrim is about Helm Hammerhand, who, we get some allusions to him and his story within the text of The Lord of the Rings itself. But we have to talk about what an a-hole he is. Because, even just, reading in the appendices, which are, seemingly relatively objective, you're like, oh, this guy is, a violent thug? So when Helm rules the Riddermark, there is a minor lord in the extreme west of Rohan called Freka. And Freka is half Dunlandish, at least, which yes, this is written, it's seemingly objectively, but that is framed as this really bad thing that Freka is part Dunlandish, and it's oh, okay, why? So Helm doesn't like Freka or trust him because Helm is just bigoted against the Dunlendings. There is no, we don't get any in-text justification for this mistrust. Freka comes to a council that he has been summoned to by Helm, and Freka is hey, Helm, you have a daughter, I have a son, Wolf, why don't we have a marriage? And Helm's response to this, act of diplomacy, more or less, is to just call Freka fat. Literally. That's what he does. Yeah. And of course, Freka takes offense of this and kind of jabs back verbally, and Helm is once again insulting, and then at the end of this council is okay, let's take this outside, Freka. And Helm and his entourage intimidate Freka's smaller entourage so that Freka's people feel like they can't help their lord, and then Helm punches Freka so hard that Freka dies. It's a one-punch KO that leads to, a fatality. This is Street Fighter. And totally, in this story, it's totally unprovoked. We don't get any mention of Freka doing anything that is genuinely objectionable. It's just that he's got some Dunlandish blood, and Helm is seemingly so offended by this marriage proposal that he just punches the guy to death. Yeah. Helm's reward for this is that 4 years later, Wolf takes his revenge and the lands that were taken from the Dunlendings. There's a big war, the War of the Rohirrim. That's what the movie is about. So left to be seen, in interviews, the creative team have talked about how Helm is a flawed individual, and they will. So okay, that's cool. And supposedly there's much more emphasis on Helm's daughter, who is Hera. But yeah, it is really, I am genuinely curious now. I didn't really care that much about this movie until now, where I'm I kind of do want to see what is the framing of this. Do they go more Jackson, where they are uncontroversially cool, or do we lean into this framing of yeah, man, Wolf was just mad about this. They killed his dad for no reason.
Yeah, I mean, I do think Freka, the enmity between the two is yeah, he is part Dunlandish. He doesn't react well to being called fat, which
no.
that makes total sense. Yeah, but come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm getting progressively more nervous about the movie. And how it handles this kind of thing, because I can, based on the fact that is it Philippa Boyens is writing it, or her?
It's her daughter.
Kid is
her daughter it? and a partner. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the big issues that I have, and I've brought this up before with the Jackson movies, is that they tend to, when they say things like "the world of men will fall" or whatever, they are explicitly they're only counting as human, basically, Rohan and Gondor.
Yeah.
And I can definitely see that happening here, where suddenly Wolf is basically not even human in some way. Just seeing it go really, really poorly. And maybe it'll be fine. Maybe I'm worried for nothing, but it's You got to be sensitive about this one.
Right. I mean, this card slightly on the table. I've known one of the main creative team members, Jason DeMarco, for a while, and my sense is that Jason is a smart and aware guy. Is that these are issues that have that I'm sure have very much crossed his mind. I am not speaking for him. I barely talked with him about it precisely because I know the layer of NDAs involved must be like, would if I walked into them, they're all printed out, they could easily fall over and kill me. So again, I don't know. I won't ask. We will see what the end results are. I think it's a case where the mention of it being flawed and all that is probably reflective of general recognition. Is going like, this story could be, and all that. And I'd be interested to see how they've addressed that. Certainly, recent events, shall we say, may have overtaken them, but this has been the case with almost any Tolkien adaptation. And weirdly enough, his one of his great larger points, you could argue, that comes up when Aragorn first meets Éomer. Things have changed over years. Years go by, and yet evil is what it is. I'm butchering the quote, but you know what I'm talking about. That sentiment is one of those things that applicability, not allegory, strikes again in unexpected ways. One can add. So for that reason, I think everyone's concern is justified. My sense is that this is recognized, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they land it, especially since they can't do it in a series form. It is meant to be one uniform, film. How do we do this?
Thank God.
Yeah.
Hooray. And all that. So we will quickly side note, by the way, that if you actually want to see an interesting series with a lot going on, it's fantastic. We are all deeply addicted to Shogun, and we cannot wait for the final episode in a couple of days. We could sidetrack about that, but that would take forever. But by the time you've heard this, the final episode will be out, and we'll probably be very happy with that too. Fantastic. Anyway, setting that aside. These concerns, it's weird because you want to talk about the Rohirrim in a more uncomplicated sense, precisely because that's the way that they sort of feel initially.
They're so simple.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And they're said to be, not as wise as the Gondor and things like this, but they're more, you get a sense that they're more, boisterous or whatever, more energized. That's sort of feeling that you often get from so many cultures, sort of like have this sort of, the city dwellers who look at these, rough men, and they're always men usually, rough men out there doing actual work. It's this stereotype that's existed for so many years and continues to the present day. So, but what's interesting to my mind, I was thinking about this again just now, thanks to this discussion. It's interesting how much if you look at the line of kings that happens, that's listed, because Tolkien does list out the two dynastic lines, the first and then the second, the first ending with Helm because his direct descendants all die and they have to shift over, is that so many of them die badly and all that. Yeah. Some of them very idiotically, you could argue. Sound like, one guy goes out going like, I'm going to go hunt this boar, and then immediately dies. It's like, great. And then there's another one who's like, one of the lines of descent, he's the one we find in the Paths of the Dead who's sort of like, I'm just going to go in here even though there are curses and it's clearly not a good place, and gee, big surprise he died there, and things like that. And you get more of the sense, again, you could argue that's the nature of the culture itself. There's things like the Orc invasion after the Dwarf Orc War when the band comes down there. So, but on the other hand, you get a sense of, oh yeah, these people kind of act first and think later, and is that always the best of things? And I think it's interesting. It's not talked about, I should note, in the main text. You have to pick this up from the appendices, that it's notable that Théoden's mom is from Gondor.
Yeah. Yep.
That, if we're talking about like, half of side and all the rest of it, it's sort of like, oh, there's an interesting strain here. Again, it's not remarked upon in the main text. You have no idea unless you go into that. And again, we're catching Théoden at the end of his reign. We don't have a sense of what he was like as a king beforehand, beyond the fact of just maybe an initial mention about how, I believe it's said at one point that Théoden doesn't really recognize Aragorn, but had heard about him when he was down there as Thorongil. Again, we're getting getting into deep appendices lore here, so don't read too much into this. But it's something to be said about the fact that we're seeing an older warrior stirring, but you got a sense that he's maybe lived this long precisely because he's maybe been a little more thoughtful, a little less careeningly off, you could say.
And like was raised in Gondor.
I believe parts of the time, yeah.
Like he spent like a chunk of time there that was very influential on him.
Right, yeah. So and Éomer ends up marrying a lady of Gondor. In fact, isn't Prince Imrahil's daughter or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's weird. It's a very sort of 19th century European monarchs all starting to become one big happy family here in a weird sort of way. So.
The Gondorians are the Habsburgs of Middle Earth.
And well, look what's happened to them. Better than the Romanovs, I guess.
You know,
I mean, the Habsburg are still around at least. Like
they are. That's true.
One of them follows me on Twitter.
Hey, there you go. Yeah.
Oh my God, what?
But like the current, maybe he doesn't now because I'm too woke. But the current head of the House of Habsburg follows me on Twitter for some reason.
Wild.
I don't know why.
Maybe he's like into fashion, and you're one of your fashion threads.
I genuinely have no idea.
That's fascinating.
It's so funny.
The world is weird and small sometimes.
It is
folks.
interesting
That's all we can say.
the layers of, I don't want to like call it racism, but like kind of even the Rohirrim, who are presented to us again as like good folk, simple folk, but like, you know, and noble and heroic, but not as noble and heroic as Gondor, and like they require infusions of Gondorian DNA, like ish, to be, you know, to sort of excel, and so even the Rohirrim are not immune from this like very, and again, like that's totally in keeping with like again the quote unquote source of the text, like it makes sense.
Yeah, it's not racist so much as eugenicist.
There we go. That's it. That's
like,
the better. Yeah.
But even then, I do think like a lot of the earlier kings are like good and whatever. Like Eorl is like a hero.
Yeah, he's like this mythical sort of.
Yeah. Like it's not quite as bad as some people want to make it sound when they talk about how Tolkien works with bloodlines and whatever. But it still is like it's not great.
Right. Like it's not a coincidence that the Dunlendings are, you know, swarthier. Although again, like it's funny because like the men of Gondor are dark haired themselves, but they have gray eyes. That's like the difference is like eye color
what
and
was
maybe
his thing with gray eyes.
I don't know.
So, like gotta anyway.
We all have our focuses. As it were, that was unintentional. Believe it or not.
Did Edith have gray eyes? Is that like what?
Oh,
the
you know
whole
what? I think she
was?
did. I feel like she was pale, brunette.
Yeah,
with gray eyes. I'm pretty sure it was.
Yes, we see things through different lenses. Okay, that was intentional. Thank you. The thing I wanted to bring up is there's something interesting about the perception of Rohan and the Rohirrim early on in the book, well before we've arrived, when they're still at Rivendell, where they're still like, you know, where there's basically they're talking, I think it's could be Elrond or whatever and all that. Basically, Boromir has to correct somebody, and I believe it's someone going like, hey, we heard rumors that Rohan's gone over to Sauron, and I'm like, that's bad image control.
Right.
if Gondor's one exact allied nation who are deeply tied into Gondor and all that, who have already gone through destructive wars like the Helm Associate War and things like this, and, you know, heirs to the throne dying on the frontier and things, all the rest of it, it's sort of like, oh yeah, they thrown in Sauron, and I'm like, that's you know, if the rumors are that bad, huh? You know,
right.
Spreading that misinformation.
We're your PR people.
Yeah. Exactly. And Boromir has to correctly say, no. You know, let me tell you this, and I think it is actually very interesting. It does introduce this sort of weird sense of qualm to them, and again, we also see how Tolkien, I think very intentionally, you know, he's not like, you know, everyone is not one big happy allied family. You know, here it's sort of like, oh, you're in Lorien. Really? You know, that does not go over well, you know, even beyond whatever Wormtongue, is doing and things like that. So there is this sense of they rather would keep to themselves because it's our land. We have it. You know, again, circumstances being what they are about why they got it. Maybe to turn towards something that is I would argue positive, but more interesting, maybe, is the way to put it, is the description. I think it's some of, dare I say, separating the land from the people. It is some of Tolkien's best writing in terms of describing these wonderful open plains, which, as far as I remember, he never really went to anywhere like that in his life. It would all have been just secondhand, but, I mean, it's a marvelous description of what a steppe or a prairie would be like, where it is nothing but endless grass. It's quite remarkable. As noted in the film version, they did the best they could given New Zealand's thing, but they actually did a reasonably good job, because the idea is that the White Mountains are always there and things like that. And of course, as we all know, the setting for Edoras, brilliant. The description, is as we referred to in our Beowulf episode, Harrod Hall becomes Meduseld, essentially. We get this idealized description of what such a hall would be like, but we also get a sense of what Helm's Deep is like. We really go into that, the glittering caves, of course. But one of my favorite sequences is Dunharrow, and the sense of this small little town, barely a settlement. You get a sense of, okay, this is where the Rohirrim live, but you don't even really get a sense of it. You get a mention of houses. But that's it. You don't really, we're not really in where the Rohirrim sleep or eat all that much, unless it's one of the big formal places or a military encampment. So there's this interesting sort of mystery. Do they camp more out on the steppe? Is it something where it's more nomadic for some of these people? Does everyone actually live more in the mountains, or is it more spread out? And it's not really gone into. And again, Tolkien doesn't have to give a full accounting for everything.
No, it's so boring.
Yeah. We've seen this mistake before, and every artist going like, here's all the details. Like, you don't need that. And he's right not to provide those details. But again, it's those suggestions that are very interesting. It's sort of like you get a sense of what's out there. You can fill in the gaps or leave them empty as you choose. And I will say that I thought that one of the nicest things that the film did, without calling attention to it, was that when we see Meduseld and the throne, and then the banners behind the throne, I forget who said it. It might have been Boyens. It might have been one of the set designers. Basically said, we set that up. The idea is those are the areas of Rohan, and that represents like the various sort of major liege lords, and that's their banner underneath the big the legendary green white horse banner. And I thought that's an interesting riff, because you do get a sense of the West Fold, the East Fold. You get a sense of organization, but you don't get a sense of exact down the line stuff. You don't need
tax policy.
Yeah. Exactly.
But also, what do the people who live in Dunharrow do? How much arable land is there? Where do they get their stuff? Do they import from other parts of Rohan? Because it doesn't seem super hospitable.
No. It feels, a lot of Middle-earth feels very empty, but Rohan feels empty in a different way.
Yeah.
Where it's even though they've been there for a long time, a lot of it still feels very temporary.
Yeah, lots of wooden. I think part of that is all of the wood that is most of it, at least in my mind. It
Pretty
feels
much
very woody instead of the stone of Gondor.
Yeah, and there aren't ruins lying around the way we have Osgiliath or whatever. There's just kind of Edoras and grass. And it's
the biggest stone structure that is there is Helm's Deep, and that of course was made by the Numenoreans. That is something they inherited. It's and not much more. Yeah, you're right. The most I can think of in terms of stone stuff is, I believe, the idea of the pavilion and where the Meduseld is set. I think there's a mention the steps are stone and things like that. So the idea is we can do this, but this is about it. And
they're just not interested in it, which is cool.
It is a hassle, but so is rebuilding when all your stuff burns down.
Well, that's why you build your house out of wood and paper, so that when it's destroyed, you can put it
again.
Whatever.
Earthquake hits. See, we brought in a connection there.
This is a Shogun podcast now. Sorry, everybody.
I would love to do a Shogun.
Limited series.
Oh, well, we were actually talking. Okay, this is a total tangent, but we were talking in the Discord about how Anna Sawai. Oh shit, I'm gonna butcher her last name. I'm so sorry. Sawai, who plays Mariko Sama, who is amazing, and how great it would be to see her play Luthien in an adaptation of the Silmarillion. She would be amazing. The end.
Co-signed,
That's not relevant to Rohan at all.
We can pretend. Although, in a weird way, I don't want to say she has an Éowyn-like role, but maybe sort of we had, of course, the Éowyn episode was the other big episode that we've done sort of on the Rohirrim already, and that was yours, and so we recommend people listen to that. Obviously, we don't want to, there is always the danger, this is what all the Rohirrim women are like. When you're a
Right.
princess, it's a little different, and you don't get much more way in the details. It is mostly dudes, and we do see them mostly in heroic mode, or at least sort of like
Yeah.
they kind of know where they're in. I mean, I do think one of the most striking moments of any of the Rohirrim is the one where I forget the character's name, but it's the one coming back who encounters Théoden and the army as they're heading towards Helm's Deep in the Host, and you just see the lone horseman in the distance, and he's just sort of like he's not some in a Robert E. Howard story would have been, oh, we defied him on the list, but I'm still good. He is broken. He is somebody who's sort of like, we are basically saying we are so effed, guys. We really are, and things like this. And he's only revived and amazed, and then he snaps into mode when you realize the king is right there, and so you sort of like, oh okay, and all that. But he has to says he basically says, I didn't expect to see you here.
Yeah.
This idea that it's a realm clearly under stress, and I think that is it's not specific to the Rohirrim, but I do like the idea that Tolkien has a good sense about how if something is rotten at the top, how it influences down in a society or in an army, if you will, or in a military. It's sort of like and I have a sense that's something Tolkien had his own thoughts on, having served in the military. What happens when a leader is not the best, shall we say? Even if you end up winning. So there is something to that too. I'm trying to think. There was something else I want to bring up. Well, is there? I mean, Oriana, it's your topic. Anything else particular about the Rohirrim?
I feel like that was like kind of my big thing. I really wanted to get into the idea of perspective, which is, I think we talk about a lot. And who are we getting this story from? And if we look at the facts through a slightly different lens, what does that reveal to us? And I think we've done a pretty good job of kind of digging into that.
I do think it's interesting that one of the lighter details that we get in the appendices is that whatever else has happened, apparently Aragorn as king still has to fight some more wars, and the Rohirrim are right there with him. It's sort of like, oh, that's interesting.
I like to think that Aragorn made peace with the Dunlendings. Don't ask me why. I just really hope that, like...
I could have sworn that was in the appendices somewhere.
Oh, is it? And I just...
Well,
it probably is.
I have to go hunting. It's probably just a small mention because they don't really get a ton of page time.
Yeah, no, we don't really hear from them directly. At most we get the interpreting of the chants, and then we hear a secondhand thing saying like, "Oh yeah, it turns out they said that they were sorry because Saruman led them astray," and I'm like going, well, that's convenient. On several levels, maybe. So
it does sort of fit into this idea of people are a little more easily manipulated when they have a legitimate grievance.
Yeah.
Or one that they perceive as legitimate. I mean,
sure.
I'm just thinking about the people I've seen in recent years fall totally under the sway of hideous leaders, and I'm like, you don't. This is wrong. You're basing your anger on something that's not really happening.
There is something to that. Yeah, so it may be an inadvertent lesson that Tolkien was teaching with that. Who can say? I guess in terms of my own, let's say, final thoughts on the Rohirrim, I mean, it's the image is certainly so seductive. I think Tolkien knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe he knew it more on an unconscious level, but he was clearly, he says as much. He would the idea that if it's the stereotype. Obviously, the Anglo-Saxon folks had horses. I mean, there's the famous Sutton Hoo burial thing where it's that wonderful horse mask. That's one of the most legendary images around. Tolkien would have absolutely been aware of that's for sure. But I think the idea was that, again, we could also be dealing with his own interpretation of arguably stereotypes. The idea of, the Cossacks, these wonderfully rough and tumble people. That's a whole area of Russian history, by the way, that takes a lot to unpack in very particular, circumstances and across centuries. So let's keep that in mind. But still, I think the idea that it's sort of like, if they'd only had more horsemen to deal with those damned Normans at the Battle of Hastings, things would be so much better. It's like, that's a very specific wish fulfillment there, pal. Let's keep that in mind.
It is. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, but I mean, I get it in terms of his pet theories, if you will, and things like that. So I get what he was trying to do, and he also, in his own particular way, is it basically says in the text where it's sort of like, or in the letters, it's sort of a combination of both. it's sort of like, okay, they weren't really speaking Anglo-Saxon. I just was applying the names to them and things like this. But by doing that, you're kind of forcing the issue. It's like, okay, you're thinking of the equivalence here. Certainly, as you've already pointed out, the fact that we've got, tall, blonde Ubermen doing these things, it's like, yeah, again, got to be careful with that. Got to be real careful.
I mean, they're not really Ubermen, though, are they? Because they're secondary to the real Ubermen.
Yeah, granted. Yeah. Contextual Uberman, you could say so.
Well, I mean, I do think it's really interesting the way it does this a lot in other ways where you encounter a lesser thing and then suddenly you're in the middle of the big thing. Like even in things like Moria, there's the cave troll and then the Balrog, and it's oh, now things are way worse.
Yeah.
And he kind of does that with Rohan and Gondor, where you get to Rohan and this is the first time you've seen an actual human kingdom.
Yeah.
And all the stuff that happens there is kind of then happens again in Gondor, but way heightened and in some ways a lot worse. And I don't know, I think that just in terms of storytelling, that's such an interesting way of you think you know how it's going to go based on the first go around, and then oh no.
Right.
Yeah, you've got this kindly king who just needs to be given a pep talk and it's all fine, and then
Not the second one.
Yeah, well, but it's also again, to compare and contrast the whole Faramir's whole thing about the men of the Twilight versus whatever, which is Gondor is becoming this and that. But the people who are allegedly lesser, like Rohan, are better able to bounce back.
Yeah.
You can't just go in and give Denethor a pep talk because he's way gone, and Théoden
he has no resiliency. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like a diamond, you just shatter.
Yeah.
Nice comparison. So. Any last thoughts, Oriana, to wrap it up? I
will say I do appreciate getting this. I appreciate the hints that are not the narrative is not about the Rohirrim and whether they are at the end of the day they are a people, and I do appreciate that Tolkien gives us these little sort of back alleyways through certain borderline throwaway comments about please stop hunting us for sport, and also the story in the appendices, which is much more akin to sort of Viking saga-ish stuff, where it's I'm going to kill you with one punch because I just find you offensive. That's I genuinely do appreciate that.
Okay, the choice of topic has come around to Jared for next time. Jared, what are we talking about?
Well, this is going to sound terrifyingly vague, but I think we'll make it work. I want to talk about, we bring this up literally every episode, but applicability and allegory.
Ooh.
Nice.
And what's going on there? Because famously he hated allegory, but what are the ways he avoids it? What is he doing instead? And how does that maybe make his work different from his many imitators?
Or his peers, as we've said before.
Right.
Or his forebears. Yeah, no, this is a very, very an appropriately open-ended topic, shall we say. So, we can go many different directions with this, rightly, and we will, I'm sure. We will indeed. So, well, we will get back to that next time. Honestly, I was at this point I was going to mention, watch Shogun, but we already have. So again, we really do like it. So that'll be that. So just reemphasizing that you got time. But more to the point, as always, thank you very much for listening. We absolutely do appreciate it. We will be back to you next time with more on that. We may even have some more information about Jared's slow but sure world conquest in books and other media. It will happen, I'm sure. And anyway, so we'll have more information there, as always. In fact, we can announce, as of today, we mentioned this last episode, the new megaphonic.fm site is now up and running, which means our new homepage, megaphonic.fm/By-The-Bywater, is also up and running as well. If you haven't checked in a while, have a look. You'll see the chance for the new organization, the new episode guide, and everything. It's all the same information as before, but now presented in another way, and maybe that'll persuade you to check out some things. It will be great. So please do have a look at that. By the Bywater is on Blue Sky, and we are all there as well individually, so please check us out, follow us there, and bythebywater@gmail.com is our email address. Thank you all very much for listening again. We will talk to you next time. Until then, see ya.